Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Future in Review podcast. I'm here today with Mark Anderson, who is the chair of Future in Review and the CEO of SNS, Strategic News Service, and we are going to be talking today about brain function, generative AI, and music. Mark, your latest piece for SNS was called "Will Brain Function Be Revealed via Gen AI Music?" And in that, you talked about what you described as a, quote, audacious potential future method for gaining a better understanding of the brain based on, of all things, getting help from the advanced neural nets in the generative AI family. Mm-hmm. Now, big picture, how would you describe, if you could headline that audacious method, what are we talking about here?
We're talking about putting music to an actual use, different from enjoying it. And that use would be to probe how the human brain is wired and in terms of circuits inside the brain, how it functions. So a very high level way of looking at brain function in a new way compared to slicing and dicing it or sticking it full of wires and trying to measure the wires output, Elon kind of thing. So we're talking about using something which is very old, music, very well defined in terms of species of music and types and categories and classes, and then taking all of that historical data and understanding that it actually could be a brain probe for us. That's the 20,000 foot view.
A little idea, a small one.
Yeah.
Can we map the human brain using generative AI created music and identification, like using Gen AI to map what's going on in the brain?
Map only in a very specific sense that I'm trying to use this word circuits, that we're looking at the functions that are happening, the actual working of it, not at where are the nerves here and there, not like a functional MRI. It's more like what makes it tick. How do you reach it? What excites it? In what way is excited? Mathematically, actually.
So in anticipation of our conversation today, I did a very little amount of research about the effect and impact of music on the human brain. And what I have read so far, and tell me if this is your understanding, but rather than what was historically thought of, which is that music actually, tends to stimulate a certain part or hemisphere of the brain, music is actually kind of unique in that, like what neurologists or researchers have observed recently is that it stimulates a whole brain response. There's actually across a lot of different cortexes and
yes, true. That's true.
Is that your understanding?
Yes, it is. So I think, Berit, to help people with this large idea, we need to tell them that we did a piece of work a few years ago, 21, called How Music Works. And that was pretty radical because it wasn't like, why do you like the Beatles or Beethoven? It was making the claim that music is mathematical intervals, and those intervals are actually the code by which we communicate in music. And one brain communicating with another is really using mathematics, these intervals, to create effects from brain to brain. Knowing the first brain, the composer, let's say, knowing that the recipient, the audience, in general, in large numbers, has certain circuits in their brain which can be excited by rhythms or by tones or by intervals, all these different things that a musician would recognize immediately through an appreciation class. That these were actually plumbing tools for getting from brain to brain. And so if we take all the wonder and sauce out of it and just say, this is really an interesting communications channel that gets opened up, which is not really about the air. It's not really about the violin or the piano. It's really about brain to brain mathematics. So that's why I use the word works, how music works, one brain to another. So if people kind of get their arms around that, or their brains, then it opens the door, I think, for having a conversation, which we are now going to have here, about part two of all that conversation, which is the headline you read off. So Could we use generative AI in some way or other to enhance that kind of understanding? That's where we are in this conversation.
So tell us a little bit more about how that would work. Like, what you run a company called Pattern Computer. That's a part of this, or Pattern. That is a part of this equation.
Yes.
In your piece,
Right.
what are the different components that would make this kind of research work in your mind? And keep, of course,
There's
this
two
is a
big
first draft.
components in terms of computing or mathematics, and one is the untrustworthy, unreliable, hallucination-prone GPT family of things, large language models. And everyone's going to be trying to make music. They're already doing that. So I'm not, I mean, that's fine, but trying to replace people, musicians with AI, I think is pretty stupid. Anyway, so I'm not a big fan of that idea. It's just writing movie scripts with AI. I don't know. I'm not a fan.
Yeah.
So
I saw a tweet recently that someone said, all these people are using generative AI to write poetry and make movies, but they're really screwing it up. I want the generative AI to do my dishes so that I have more time to write poetry and make movies.
Well put. Well put. Even though it has failures baked into it. Clean most of the dishes, not all of them, right? But what is there a way to use that fail-prone stuff in a different way that would be unexpected with regard to music? So instead of trying to outperform Beyonce or whatever the hell they're trying to do right now, how about this? What if we asked generative AI to train on music that we knew had been well accepted by human beings over something long period of time or very wide audience? So I took two examples. One was Beethoven, because that's over a very long period of time, where many, many people have said, I like this. And then I took the Beatles because the opposite is true. It's very wide. Everyone in the world seems to like the Beatles, and for a fairly short relative period of time. And if you trained on either of those data sets, all the music of, right? You took GPT 4.5 or whatever, all the music of Beethoven. That would be a different way of using it, because the intention there is not to outperform Beethoven. Tell GPT 4.5, write a Beethoven piece. Okay, it'll do that. What it's going to do is take the rules that Beethoven internally had in his head, that he had learned about throughout his entire life, about these circuits of the brain and how to reach them. And it's going to codify that. It's going to abstract that into here's how, the summary of all of that into one song, one symphony, one whatever. And that is really an interesting piece of work. Because now what we have, thank you, GPT 4.5, is a summary of the rules of the road for making communications happen mathematically between one brain and another.
Well, we have the outcome. I'm not sure that we have the rules.
The rules are baked
due to the black box problem.
Okay, so part two, then, yeah, you're right. So that's the new training set. And then we put something like Pattern Computer. We put a pattern discovery engine or some pattern recognition engine against that outcome from GPT 4.5, and that will find the actual rules of the road.
Okay.
And it will tell us by ranking and in order and mathematically, because it's explainable, really explainable, not BS explainable. It will give us all of that, and the result will be the outcome was the training set, and we trained the discovery engines on that, and the discovery engines came back and told us, here are the top 30 rules that Beethoven used in reaching from one brain to another, or the top 500, you take your pick, and then here they are in a mathematical formula. Here's an equation you can cut and paste for achieving those goals. Wow. Now you've got it.
Pretty incredible.
Yeah. Now theoretically, this is all theory. Now you would have an understanding of how a brain response based on its actual responses, not to an EKG, or not to an encephalogram or something, but actually to hundreds of years of cultural change and various tribes and peoples around the world, and all that stuff filtered through into
hold on. What you've described so far is only one half of that. It's the musical rules, but it's not the brain response. So how do we get that point and that part?
No, the brain response is baked into that.
How is
The
the brain
fact that we
response
have,
baked in?
so I didn't pick Louis Capaldo Bonaccio as our favorite composer. Why not?
Mm-hmm.
Because no one's ever heard of him. He failed. Why did he
Mm-hmm.
fail? Because he wasn't as good as Beethoven, probably.
Okay.
And so I'm by biasing the selection toward someone whose music has passed very broad acceptance in classical music for hundreds of years. The selection itself makes the statement that we are only selecting for things that human brains have already accepted, been reached by.
Well, that's one part of it. But I mean, don't you think that human brains could interpret? There are a lot of different human brains out there with different cultural, norms and kind of musical expectations. And what I think could be really fascinating is if you took that a little bit one step further and said, what is the measurement of these, like applying these rules that you've just described?
Yeah.
What is the measurement or what is the impact on the brain then of different musical types or
Oh, you could.
genres,
You could do
and
that.
then using pattern to map
Well, I think
those?
people have done pretty. So you
Yeah.
could do a functional MRI of someone listening to Beethoven. You could do a functional MRI of someone listening to this thing that the GPT 4.5 is going to make.
Mm-hmm.
That would be even more interesting in a way. But and where I thought you were going to go is you could also go around the world and say, are there folk songs that are 1,000 years old? Sure, there are. Or are there authors, composers of folk songs who were very good at that? And can we train on all of their oeuvre,
Yeah.
from the year 400 or whatever? Sure,
Yeah,
we
I
can.
mean that is what I was implying. Yeah.
Yeah, and we do that in Africa, and we do that in America. We do that all over the world, and all of it would be fascinating. I think it all would have the same kind of information as long as you're being careful to. You're not just asking the guy next door to play the guitar for you.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to find data sets that have been widely or long acceptance times, or wide and long, so that you know that what you're training on has been really well tested against the human brain in many, many years and many, many different types of brains. That's your
It
starting
would
point.
also be very fascinating to see the difference between um, musical preferences at different ages
Yes.
and with different to identify the difference between kind of like brain function response to like
Right.
popular contemporary
Yeah.
music as
Yeah.
opposed to classical, like what you're describing, which is this music that's been around for hundreds of years.
That's
But
right.
that could tell us a lot about the way that our brains are changing and
True. That's
as
true.
humans.
You can almost guess what you're going to find, but that is true. That is true.
Yeah.
As the brain becomes more developed and more nuanced and more advanced and more nerves and more connections in those nerves, you're going to see more nuanced responses. I assume. And if you look at music for children, it's going to be different than music from Beethoven.
Right.
Yeah,
Different
not
types
surprising.
of brain function.
But
Yeah.
but the whole idea that I think you're describing, which is using music as a probe, is pretty interesting.
Yeah. It's fascinating.
And there's a lot of things you can do with that. Once you show, you'd want to write a couple of papers showing that it's worth your time to do it. That you really are learning about the circuits, the functionality and circuits in the brain. Once that's done, I think a lot of people would jump in and try things. Pretty cool.
So you have been
It's a bit
an
overwhelming,
outspoken
It's kind of,
critic
yeah,
of LLMs for
yeah,
many reasons we've talked about on this podcast before many times.
yeah,
I don't think we need to go into them again. What
yeah.
about this application is different for you?
Instead of asking it to make music for us, because we just wanted to compare it to, you know, Liberace, just whatever we want, just do that. We're not doing that. We're making some much more interesting assumptions about music itself and about the data sets we want to look at, so that the strong parts of LLMs, which are large language models. They're readers.
Right.
They're good readers. People
Mm-hmm.
don't like the predictive typing thing, but that's a very important part of it. They're good at predictive typing. So they have transformers and they have, other aspects to what they're doing. But basically, it's a data set, which is an impure set, and they're trying to get to purity from impurity. That's loser's game. So on the other hand, if you restrict the set to anything, but in this case, to something which has more meaning than we thought,
Mm-hmm.
then you're getting the strong point. The strong point of LLMs is language. It's not what Sam Altman says or implies. It's not becoming AGI or general intelligence. That's not it. And this
Yeah.
emerging stuff
It's
is
also
forced.
not innovation or new things, right? Because we're by nature of, I think a lot of people kind of get confused about like, well, it's going to create all these new tech, you're like, it can only really regurgitate what's already been ingested in
All
different
we're showing is how
varieties.
easily people can be played. People are
Mm-hmm.
played so easily, and that GPT and Chat GPT are going to be the ultimate proof of how easy it is to play mankind for a fool. So, by being a mirror, a big mirror, and we love ourselves. So, if we get around that for a minute, that's what I don't like about it. But in this
Mm-hmm.
case, we're not asking it to mirror us in general and make us happy and be our lover or whatever. Now we're saying, no, just go study Beethoven, come back and show it to us.
Yeah.
Give us your best shot at being a language model in music and give us that. And I think it ought to be really good at that. That's the one thing that it's good at, without any hallucination, but it's designed to hallucinate. So I won't say that. Anyway, they'll be minimal, I think, and they won't be too damaging. And the result will be that we will have used it for what it's made for.
So I have another question for you, which is you are a musician yourself.
Yep.
How, as a musician, do you think about this problem differently? And how did your experience as a musician help lead to this idea?
Well, when you're a musician, if you're a composer, now any musician, great. If you're composing music, which I also happen to do, then the process of composing, or the process of how you would play back a cover, for a rock and roll song, but the process of composing, you're asking yourself constantly, what goes next? What does that mean? Well, that's a compendium of all the stuff you've ever learned to play or listen to, and then all the stuff you learned about audience response when you performed. And all those things go into that microsecond of what goes next with one finger on the piano.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're trying to do is find some beautiful compromise between what you know logically almost, or in terms of art form, what you know and what you aspire to, what people call the muse. So could you create a more beautiful song than before? What does that mean? What does beauty mean in music? And what it really means, it could just mean it for yourself alone. That's a little selfish, but that happens. Or if you're used to performing, and most musicians want that, it really means what are you going to, what is Berit going to hear? And will she like it? Will she love it? Will she jump up and down when she hears it? Or will it just be like pretty good? And that may be over time. Sometimes musicians are not well appreciated in their country or in their time. But boy, 500 years later, they're the only thing left from that time,
Right.
that country. So having some sense of what lasts or what's really the right thing to do, is in your own brain as well as in the listener. So all that stuff comes to bear on every single thing you do when you're composing either a folk song or a Beatles song or the Ninth Symphony.
I love the idea of, and I think this is a good place for us to end, your brain naturally having identified all of these mathematical patterns without you even being aware of it, right?
Correct.
As a
Yeah.
composer.
Try to.
And yeah, yeah. We think so often as music as an emotional kind of, sometimes even spiritual experience. And it's a fun reframe to remember that behind those experiences, there's also a mathematics about it. And in
Your
that way,
brain,
mathematics then becomes this very poetic spiritual experience. I just love the interplay between those two ideas.
well, your heart's in your brain, it turns out, and
Yeah.
spiritually, yeah, and your brain works in very mathematical ways, even though we don't understand it fully. Yep. Well, that's it.
Well, Mark, thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure as
Great.
always.
Appreciate it. Yep.
We will look forward to welcoming you back soon on a future episode of the Future in Review podcast.